And we are live with GM Party episode 105. We are talking about the topic of magic in RPG game design. We're here with Alex DeJesus, Minna Riley, and Richard Price Landry, and me, Andy Burdan, and welcome to GM Party. So let's start things off with a broad overview of the topic. The magic in RPGs generally is used to get that sort of otherworldly fantasy aspect that is fun to play pretend with. To get that supernatural sort of feeling that is so compelling to tell stories about. What kinds of fantastical elements have you played with in your designs? Richard?
Sure. So most of the games that I've worked on have not really taken magic as sort of a primary focus. It's sort of just by happenstance that, oh, okay, here's your bog standard fantasy adventure, and it's sort of there because it's part of the genre, I guess, rather than sort of being a conscious choice of, hey, this is what magic is here to do. And I think, because of that, it ends up being bland. The project that I'm working on right now, Descent into Midnight, is an aquatic world where you've got psionics as a sea creature, and one of the things that we're doing with it is we're specifically not having magic, and instead having psionics, and the way that we're sort of framing that is that magic a lot of times, especially in like a high fantasy setting, is often about what the person is doing to influence the world around them, and is making big flashy things happen and all this sort of thing. And so like the way we're approaching psionics is that it's all about the internal thing, where you're looking inside yourself and you're focusing on your connection to the things around you, but really like turning that lens inward. And I think the way that we've done that has sort of helped me reframe the way that I think about, like, okay, well, if that's the opposite, or if that's the thing that we're not doing because we don't want to present magic, then okay, then to me in my head, I'm starting to realize that magic very much is that the person is going to reach out and do things in the world around them. And I feel like that's the mindset that I didn't realize I had until I started trying to do the opposite.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Neat.
How about you two, Alex? Keep doing that.
Which one first?
Well, let's start with Minna.
Okay. So I actually don't do a whole lot of RPG design, just been dipping my toes in, but I think most of what I've actually started working on has been about magic, because I like RPG systems. I don't enjoy the classical magic systems. Like the Vancian magic systems don't do anything for me in terms of fantasy. Like a thing that I have thought a lot about with fiction and stuff is that magic does have to have limits, and it makes sense that having the spell lists puts that limit on it, but I don't find that compelling personally. And I think a while back I worked on a lasers and feelings hack to try and discipline and intuition, I think, and trying to balance learning and your connection to the world was kind of a thing that I was thinking about. And then with the witches school, I think we were trying to again balance innate power and the learned skill kind of thing. Like the way those interact could create like your specific way of dealing with magic, and then the actual effects are kind of narrative. Yeah, so it's kind of a lot of based out of like what I was interested in, like reading fantasy growing up.
Great. How about your part, Alex?
So I'd been wanting the reason Minna and I started working on Witches was because I'd wanted to start running a game, sort of not Hogwartsy themed, but definitely taking that magic approach to high school, and there really wasn't a satisfactory system out there to associate with that because I wanted to look at magic, but the wizards in their towers, it's books, it's attached to items way more in a, I don't know if it's the right word, but like holistic, it's integrated into everyday life. Almost like Kiki's delivery service type of thing is one thing I know we looked at, where it may not be the norm, but it's not unusual enough that in and of itself it makes you an outlier. You know,
It's not esoteric.
Yeah, it's not esoteric. It's a part of the world. It's a lived in and known quantity, and how that reflects, because that's more interesting to me than, you know, wizards in their towers doing whatever they do.
Yeah, and I realized, I'm remembering now that we had a chat in the Discord. I believe you were part of it, Alex, where we talked about a hypothetical setting in which necromancy was a highly well-regarded profession, and the entire economics and business entities and running of the city was done through the benefits of necromancy. So you had a lot of the physical labor was done by skeletons and such things, and the actual, instead of having the necromantic magics being this taboo, reviled thing, it was an honor to have your relatives' remains used to benefit the city through the work of the necromancers. But it was an interesting mental exercise to sort of twist those preconceptions of the taboos around death and that kind of aspect.
I think the thing that would interest me most about like a discussion like that is how I know in world building, like one of the pieces of advice that I've heard that I found pretty useful is, you know, that every solution is its own problem and like was meant to solve another problem. So like if you have a society where necromantic magic is accepted, like what was the driving need that made it so that, you know, maybe not the first time something like this happened, or, you know, like, but where was the line that, you know, back in the day that they needed the, you know, the labor of their loved ones, and someone was like, yeah, okay, that's cool, you know, like, you know, where was the point where that filled a need, and then like all the things that sort of like built upon that, and then what problems does it generate? Like, you know, like right now, you know, we have automation like coming and doing a lot of the same things in society that like you know, the Industrial Revolution did, where it's putting out people, you know, putting people out of work in certain sectors, and people are having to shift into different you know, things. And like, okay, if skeletons are out there doing, you know, X things, like they're sweeping the streets and farming and doing all this stuff, then what are, you know, people who are alive doing? I don't know. That's just immediately where my head goes, and like all the social implications of magic and what normalizing those things means. I think is a lot more interesting to me than the actual like, oh, okay, well, I can raise a skeleton, or I can summon a spirit or something like that.
Yeah, my appeal to the discussion was that it got me thinking about um, it's somebody's remains. Like
Mhm.
where this skeleton that you're making do your bidding, what's the history behind that skeleton?
Mhm.
That's something that's not really explored. It came from somewhere. It was a living thing. It didn't
I
materialize out of nothing.
So I was actually just yesterday. One of my friends on a Discord I was on discovered that there's a tool out there right now where you can make ASCII art, but it's like real simple shape. So it's like like rectangles, and then they've got like a free draw tool. And so they decided on a whim to start a roguelike in a Discord server with no rules and just like start from the beginning. And so, of course, because it's a roguelike, my character died in the first 5 minutes. And so we decided that, one of the other people who was in the Discord came in as a new character, and they used a new symbol, to represent their character. And there had been two skeletons in the room who I had killed one of them. And so when they entered the room, there were two skeletons. And so I immediately took on the role of one of the skeletons, and it turned into a whole thing. And within about half an hour, we had an entire party of dead adventurers, including a squirrel, who were now skeletons and interacting as a party of skeletons and going around. And now we're going around and doing all this silly stuff. But it was fun because it was like, oh, we now had the history in just this super short amount of time of like, okay, who are these people? Who are these skeletons? What are their motivations? What are they talking about? And like there was a story there immediately just with this thing that we'd whipped up in in the matter of about half an hour. And like you said, like how much more interesting would it be if like, if you had a society where it's like, oh, instead of, my grandfather served in World War II, it was like, my grandfather's skeleton is over there and he's the foreman, and that's him right there. Look at him, and like you can imagine like things like people decorating them, or giving them jewelry, or like being a whole status thing about like how well you keep up, these skeletons of your ancestors, and there's an actual physical like representation of them. And so
the line of action that is
huh.
Things.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked a lot about like world building and sort of intention. Magic is often used as a mechanical, and touched on that. As a way of enabling abilities that go beyond the typical normal experience. So in terms of mechanical magic things, I've seen lots of different types of systems, from like recipe-based systems like Ars Magica, shopping list type systems like D&D, or any sort of narrative systems like any number of games. What are your opinions of the different variations of magic? I know it's a big question, but
Yeah.
let's start on the other side and go with Alex.
Yeah, I've got to say that one of my favorite magic systems that I've ever played in is Mage the Awakening from White Wolf. And that's because it really, similar to the narrative systems, it leaves a lot open to player interpretation. And I don't know if you've ever played that system or not, but the way it works is that you have, certain ranks in like your raw magic, and then you have certain ranks in the more refined magic that you specialize, time magic, element magic. And so there's no shopping list. It's just each stat represents a certain level of proficiency in that. So say at 1 rank, you can use existing sources of an element, like an outlet, to move electricity around a little bit. Whereas at max DOS, you can summon thunder from the sky. And then everything in between is just up to player interpretation and GM buy-in. And that really appeals to me as a way to give you flexibility and foster creativity. And that's what Minna and I went with to start basing the Witches system off of.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm more familiar with Mage the Ascension than Mage the Awakening. So I'm not sure how they differ in style, but Mage the Ascension had covered both styles. It had like a sort of rough interpretation narrative style powered by categories, and as you said, open interpretation. But they also had some pre-made spells that they called rotes that you just use.
Yeah.
I imagine that was for approachability, as it was, when it came out, it was, very D&D heavy, shopping list oriented kind of games, coming from the wargaming history of D&D, where that's what you do.
Yeah.
Play with minis and
and that's what it came from. So it was refreshing to see a different approach.
Yeah, I enjoy it quite a lot. I've had arguments with trying to get the buy-in. It's like it's coincidental, not vulgar.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. For me, like, I grew up, D&D, Pathfinder. That's probably about 95% of what I was playing up until about 3 years ago. And I don't know that I've ever played a character, aside from a video game, above like level 3 or 4. And, part of the reason I was never inspired to do that is because once you get past a certain point, the amount of bookkeeping is ridiculous. It's like you look at like a 20th level caster in any of the D20 systems, and you're looking at, if it's a class where you get to choose which spells you have and you only know those spells, okay, you only have a list of like 30 or 40, right, that or however much it is. Only.
Oh my god.
Yeah, only. And then you get to things like any of the classes where you get access to the entire spell list and you can change them out every day. And it gets to be completely overwhelming of like, okay, these are all the mechanical choices that I have. And you want to, if you have a theme that you want to do, like let's say you really want to play like a fire sorcerer, right? You end up having to do things like, oh, well, here's an ice storm spell. Hey, GM, can I do this as a fire spell to kind of fit my theme? And we'll just hand wave it. And you sort of have to like, there's a lot of tiptoeing you have to do and all this, and it's all tied into the game balance. I think, like you said, the approachability of having discrete options, especially for like low level adventures and all that, is really nice at times. I think for newer players who, don't necessarily know all the rules, they go, oh, here's a thing I can learn. I can learn that a fireball is 1d6 damage, 3.5 or whatever, per level, and it has a 20-foot radius, and that's it, right? Like, it's a thing that they can figure out and learn and be done with. Because I think as much as some of the more open systems allow for a lot of creativity and like just an intuitive sense of like, okay, we're gonna play Harry Potter, right? Everybody knows kind of what things are reasonable within that universe to do, and as long as everybody has that sort of shared idea of what's expected or what's reasonable, you can work with that. But if you're coming in as a new person, maybe you just don't know, right? And I feel like, in a way, it's the shopping list is can be more approachable because there are discrete things to pick that you can feel like, oh, I have mastery over this. Once I know it, it's sort of like learning math as opposed to, learning art, right? It's like, oh, good, I can get the right answer, right? Like I can know that, yes, this is the spell that I'm going to use. And I haven't played a lot of stuff that's freeform, and so like the last couple of years, especially, been doing a lot of story gaming, and the game that we're writing right now is powered by the Apocalypse, where it literally is your power set is like a 2 or 3 word description, like your psionics can do this kind of thing, and that's it, and it's completely up to you, and it's been really refreshing coming from the background of having the shopping list stuff to be able to say, my character has, energy manipulation. And whatever fits the story at the time just works without having to say, oh, well, can I cause a door to slam? Or can I make my voice boom or something? Like you don't have to worry about can I or can't I. It's just, is this reasonable? Yes or no, move on, tell a good story.
One issue I've gotten into, because I work with programmers and nerds, is that when I game with them with a system that allows sort of energy manipulation, like, well, everything is energy. I can do.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's not what I meant.
I mean, you're going to run into pedantry and like the simulationism and all that. Like, dealing with anybody who's got an engineering mindset, obviously that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to be like, come on, y'all, relax.
Yeah, but you're right. The narrative effect of Powered by the Apocalypse games, where you apply the rules after you describe what happens, really lends itself quite well to the narrative storytelling.
Well, and there's wushu too, where literally what you say happens, and that gets pretty wacky if you don't rein it in.
That's very cool. Mina, I feel like we jumped over you a little bit there.
Oh, that's fine. As long as we keep going. Yeah, I have to say, I actually only got into tabletop RPG a little over a year ago, so I don't have the same like ingrained background in like the D&D style spellcasting. Actually, admission, I think I don't think I've read the player's handbook thing about magic. I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna play a fighter. I don't want to deal with this. I don't care about this.
Yep. Like, oh, this is too much homework.
Yeah. I mean, I was already... D&D was the first game I played because that was what the person I was talking to offered. It was a lot of reading anyway. But, yeah, I'm just not terribly... It makes sense because you do have to put limits on magic, and especially in D&D, you have to balance with people who don't have magic.
Yep.
Which I think is why I gravitate towards systems. If you're going to have magic, like, everybody has access to it if that's what they want to have.
Yeah.
You just have varying like levels and varying specialities. Why did I say specialities? I kind of came at all of this from fantasy fiction, where I'd always gravitated towards more intuitive magic systems. So, yeah. One thing I do love in PBTA, there's the Druid Handbook, which is just the Druid Handbook in Dungeon World has maybe like my favorite like move for magic. It has like I think it's elemental something or other. Elemental Mastery. When you call in the primal spirits of fire, water, or earth, roll plus whiz, and on a miss, you get like a complete catastrophe occurring as a result of the calling, which is just beautiful. Like, either you get to do a thing with the help of nature, or it's gonna blow up in your face. And I love that possibility with magic, and it really lends itself to both giving you a limit in the form of, if you fuck up, something something bad is going to happen, so you gotta approach it with caution. But then you can also just go crazy with what the actual effects are. It's very fun.
Yeah, nothing is more frustrating than casting a spell where you have a limited resource and the enemy saves and nothing happens.
I mean, I can see like where a limited resource might be helpful in terms of like limiting the amount of magic you can do. Like in term, if you have like a reserve, I just limiting it to specific spells doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, and that's one thing about what you're saying about the consequences that I really loved about playing the mage system is that if you rolled poorly enough, reality itself does not like what you're doing and comes back to smack you in the face.
I remember we were talking about the witches system and we weren't quite sure what to do with it. And then you like you started explaining like the whole mage system, like, yes, this sounds so good.
Yeah, because again, like we talked earlier, when you have full ranks and elements, you can call lightning from the sky. But if you do that on a sunny day, there's going to be consequences, and I think that's really great.
Yeah, it's I love that aspect of mage and sort of the personification, I guess, of reality as a defensive force that tries to reassert itself in the face of strong-willed magic users, and it shifts the game a little bit to this sort of the antagonistic struggle between untamed wilderness and human interaction. Yeah. There are some problems with that view, certainly, but it allows for that avenue of being able to coexist with reality and with nature, to sort of integrate those fantastical experiences in a way that reinforces both sides, which I thought was a wonderful perspective. It's like not just breaking things all the time. You can, work within your limitations and make a more interesting story.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we've talked about the topic in general beautifully. I would like to start to shift somewhat towards the projects that we're working on. We've touched on them a couple of times as we're going, but let's talk about our own stuff. And we got a bunch of designers in a chat room, and let's help each other out with any issues and problems that we've walked into.
Yeah.
I'm going to take most of a backseat because the only game I have right now only just barely touches that magic. So I'll speak about that later, but I will let you guys take the lead. Richard, I know you have opinions.
Oh, well,
I'm going to throw you out front.
I don't know. I think like I was saying, the one of the things, because I'm working with a couple of different people for this project for Descent into Midnight. You got Rich Howard and Taylor LaBreche and Brandon Leon Gambetta, which is an amazing group. I have no idea like how we managed to get those people together in one room, and I'm like, I get to work with these people, which I think is the fun of being a game designer who's active on Twitter, right? And just like being out there, because you make a dumb joke and then all of a sudden you're working on a project with cool people and you're like, how did this happen? This is my life now. But like I was saying, we're specifically like, we're doing psionics as something that like you're looking inside of yourself and is like very much not magic. But I think it, in some ways, it's drawing upon the same sort of like, it's dealing with it on the same spectrum of like, how do you make extraordinary things happen? and one of the things that that I think has been a challenge is like how do you make something where the character is looking inside of themselves, and sort of like the mechanism by which they do things is they're focusing and they're turning that sort of eye inward to sort of like have that focus and that control to connect with their environment. And like how do you explain that connection to the outside world, and like how they affect everything outside of themselves through looking inward? That's not just, oh, okay, but you can hand wave it away and it's basically just magic, right? Like how do you get that feel? And like we're one of the things that I'm most proud of, or that I am most proud of with the game right now, is the way that we're doing a uh, a session framing mechanic, where when you step into the session, um, basically it's a team of psionic creatures, um, and they all have an exceptionally strong psionic connection. Everything in the world around them like has a bit of this, you know, connection to the psionic. We're calling it the echo, you know, of like how they interact with each other. But the team has an especially strong connection, and they basically have like a place that they can go to, a mental sanctuary, where they project a version of their consciousness into it. And so like if they're even if they're separated, they can all sort of like go into this meditative state and connect with each other. And it's at the beginning of the session and the end of the session, you go around the table, and the GM or the guide leads them through a shared visualization, like meditation technique, and sort of starts it out with saying, okay, you know, the sand is there, the temperature of the water is just right. There's, you know, light, you know, coming down through the surface of the water, and it's all this, to kind of like help get you mentally into that space. And then each person goes around and says something about like, okay, what does this place look like to them, and how is it changing over the course of the session, you know, based on like their emotional state. um, and you know, if the community around them, because the game is about basically fighting this corruption, so as they become corrupted, as their community becomes corrupted, like how does that manifest within that space? um, and you know what that does, what we found that does is it helps people get into the mindset of their characters, and sort of like I want to say it's like a hippy dippy thing, you know, like I don't know how to describe it, but it's like very much like, you know, that's our attempt to sort of like put the player into the headspace of a character who is very much connected to the people around them at the table, and the setting. Um, but like we're always looking for ways to make that connection stronger, and like reinforce that sort of like, that connection to each other and the world around them, which is basically mirroring the way that psionics is working and how they're doing these things that they can do. um, like in a, I forget what the fancy word for it is, but it's basically like where the experience of the player mirrors the experience of the character. Yeah. So it's like, how do we use that to our advantage, to make it feel, in our case, not magical isn't the right word, but connected. Um,
Yeah, I kept thinking as you were describing it, I immediately went to meditation techniques, and then sure
Yep.
enough, that's where the conversation went.
Yep.
But I kept thinking of various freeform LARP techniques that
Okay.
might blend well into the game. It's tabletop.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it would be a hybrid approach for you. So simply holding hands around the table, might echo that psychic connection in a physical way that might be compelling. Of course, you have to discuss that in safety mechanics.
Oh, yeah.
Having some sort of audio cue that works with that sort of contemplation aspect. You mentioned the visualization technique. You had like white noise, whale noise, water stuff. Kind of just gets you instantly into that contemplative mind state. Jason Morningstar's Skeletons uses that to great effect with silence. You set a timer and you sit there in silence as the skeletons that are waiting for the adventurers to appear. You wait for like 5 minutes in silence. I don't know if you've ever done that with a room full of people.
That's surprisingly intense. Yeah.
Brutal. We do 10 seconds of silence before recording podcasts, and everyone is at the end is like, "Thank God it's over."
Yeah. I haven't actually played it. It's right there, but just reading it, it's like, oh my God, that's forever. Now, granted, it builds up to that. It's like silence 10 seconds to up all the way up to 5 minutes.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, I know it. I think there's a blind spot for me as far as like game design because I haven't read or played any LARPs. That I'd be really interested to see like what they have to offer. Yeah. But what were you gonna say, Alex?
One thing that may work mechanically to tie this in together is having effects in game be the result of the player's reactions or movements or motions or something like that. Because I know in playing Bluebeard's Bride, I forget the exact way the move is called, but if it's even called just the shutter. Like if you shutter in real life, because the game has reached you on that level, it bleeds over into the game.
Right. Yeah, and if somebody, in terms of Descent into Midnight, you could do something like if the player closes their eyes, the magic works more effectively. That kind of embodiment is sort of as an optional benefit.
Yeah, I would wonder how, like, because it's it's PBTA and there's not like the results of an action have relatively low mechanical granularity. I think it's a challenge because if you're doing something like listening to Quinn and the folks doing like Swallows of the South with like Exalted, where they've got the stunt system, where there's a big enough sort of mechanical granularity to be able to say, okay, you get a bonus of this much if you do X. I wonder like how to quantify a benefit or if even there's a mechanical trigger to it, or if it's simply a suggestion in the phrasing of the way that the move is triggered. It might be interesting to look at that.
I like
when
that.
When you close your eyes and connect such and such.
Yeah.
That triggered something for me. If you had different styles of action, if you do something intrinsic and internal and contemplative, you have to close your eyes and remain silent. You're doing something active and outward focusing and manipulative. You have to raise your voice and open your eyes wide and gesture emphatically.
Yeah.
Embodiment techniques, I guess. It's and getting that sort of driving that sort of feeling. Doing embodiment techniques is a shortcut to bringing that feeling internally. You can also build that up in a slower way by setting up scenarios, but that puts more load on your GM.
Well,
certain areas too.
One of the things, I think PBTA does a good job of allowing you to sort of set the tone for the game right there in the stats, if your game has stats. And so for us, you're looking at things like hope or community or altruism, things like that, where it's about where the motivations of the character are and about their mental state and sort of like their connection to the world around them and how they relate to it. And I think it would be interesting to sort of like have some suggestions about like if you are embracing something that is using this stat, here's some ways that you can like get into that and sort of reinforce that at the table.
Yeah, have you taken a look at Mark Richardson's Headspace?
So I own a copy of it. I have listened to a couple of one-shots on various podcasts of it. I have not actually sat down and read it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really dives into that emotional aspect of working with mentally connected teams. I feel like it's more emotionally oriented than Into Midnight is possibly. I don't know.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm fairly certain. I think probably Taylor has definitely read it. I think, but like it was one of the inspirations for it was Masks, and then Headspace definitely to sort of because we wanted the same sorts of like character relationships and deep storytelling and emotional storytelling that you can get from a game like Masks. And we wanted to double down on it. And since we were, Rich kind of had the idea for the setting because he's Mr. Aquatic gaming stuff, beyond being an amazing person. But this setting that he wanted to create, like he was very specific about like not having magic and having it be psionics and having like tapping into that be the way that to make things happen. And I think oh gosh, I completely just lost my train of thought. I had it and Headspace, yeah. But that was like the way to double down on it is, and like we're going to have this connection between everyone. They're already connecting to the world in this way. Let's make them connect to each other. And then I think like I think we've all heard playthroughs of it. And so like that idea of like we're focusing on the mental states and the emotions and everything of the characters. They're going to be connected to each other mentally, and then like seeing the interplay back and forth of how that happens was a definite influence, even though I personally haven't read the game. And where that has a lot to do with like the skills and the sort of the heist stuff going on. Because we've got a different focus, we go a different direction with the actual implementation of like how the group works together. But there is a lot of that like like we kept using the word headspace for the mental sanctuary, like as we were sort of coming up with that idea, as it was like kept going, well, they're all going to be in the same headspace, and like, you know, in my head at least, there was a big capital H on that.
Right.
As we were talking about it for a long time until we sort of like worked through how we wanted to have it look in the end.
Yeah.
The thematic bit is fantastic because it makes me think of like long distance communication, whales and dolphins. Like the sound echoes that go through the water travel way faster than anything humans ever experienced without using telecommunications equipment.
Oh yeah, the SOFAR channel, which is the sound and something ranging. Like there's a specific depth and pressure, it's a channel, right? Like down at a certain depth, it's like between like 300 or 1,000 meters, depending on where you're at in the ocean, where because of the way that temperature differentials in the water work, sound can approach one layer of the water, and the different, I think it's the different densities of it, will reflect sound in a certain way. And so if you're within this little range band of this specific temperature and pressure, and you're in there and you generate a sound within that, what happens is the sound bounces off of the top, and then the bottom, and then the top, and then the bottom, and it just goes for, it can go for thousands of miles. And that, like, inevitably, I feel like probably a third to half of the games that we've run of Descent into Midnight like have featured that, because it's just such a cool thing, you know, and whale song and all these things, and like the psionic that are in the setting just sort of double down on that and make that, you know, they sort of like tie into that as like a theme of like, okay, you have these communications that can go out and reach really far really quickly, and then when that's cut off, that's another way to be like, oh, signal, something's bad. But
That's hard.
yeah, but I want to hear about witches now.
All right.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good segue. I was trying to think of a good one, and
Excitement of one of the people at the table. That works.
I like it.
I actually haven't seen much of it in action because we're running it, or it's being run in a PvP. I don't keep up well with PvPs, so I had to drop out.
oh boy. I'm obsessed with them.
Yeah.
I have a problem when it comes to play by
Oh,
post.
please talk to Alex.
Let's see. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 going on right now. 6 of
I
which
have
I'm
2,
running.
and I'm keeping up poorly with them both.
I'm just gonna look it up real quick here and do a count, but we can.
Yeah.
Wait, no, it's one active one. Never
But yeah,
mind.
so I mean, I know that like with Minna, we'd talked about it because one thing we wanted to do is make a system that was satisfactory to us, where we could have magic happen, but also like ramp down the conflict a little bit and up the more slice of life, My Little Witch Academia keys delivery service feeling.
I think we just ended up not even dealing with the combat system because we didn't care.
Yeah, not really. I mean,
It's not a focus of the action.
no, it's going to be coming up now and that's something we need to work on, or I need to work on, is developing that a little bit. Is we got to the point in the world building where the players are like, okay, we want some conflict now.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me know about that. But I think we broke down. We just started, I think, naming like things that would be like interesting specialties of magic at a magic school.
Yeah,
because I think we worked off. Was it the disciplines mechanic in Mage?
Yes.
There's like a thing where you can have like specializations that you pull on.
Here it is.
My familiarity with the system is through vampire, so all of my terminology is fuzzy.
But
Well,
so
because
no, go on.
I was just gonna say, well, with all the White Wolf games, right?
Yeah,
they have to have a fancy name for everything.
Yeah.
It's all basically the same stuff. It's just,
Yeah.
oh, well, in this game, it's called this proper noun, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So one thing I think that we did spend a lot of time working on, and I have like the beta sheet pulled up because it's still in active beta pretty much, is taking that idea of areas you are good at from mage and kind of broadening it out a bit for witches. And one thing we were really intentional about when we were making the system is that if you're a magic user, you're a witch. So no matter what, you can be called a witch, which I think is really important because that means it doesn't have to be like the Western idea of a witch. We had someone come in and try to do Kabbalah. And,
oh yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, and even take the magicians, and instead of casting spells, doing finger tutting to do the magic. And I think it's really important and really intentionally done to allow that. So one thing we wanted to do, Minna and I, tell me if I'm speaking for you out of turn.
That's fine.
Is give that same leeway as mage does, and we kind of wound up saying that, okay, magic, let's broadly put it into two types. You have your ritual magic, which is like potions, hexes, charms, portals, divination. That's more your recipe list magic that we talked about earlier, right? Where you kind of have to have a certain set of stuff in order to make it work.
It's knowledge-based magic.
Yeah. And then your spontaneous magic, which is combat magic, has a broad category for attack and defense. Elemental magic, flight, nature, and spirits and familiars. So, because that way you give, I think, players a lot of room to kind of mold that to fit their character. So,
and you only you choose which ones you rank higher in, and those are going to be the ones that you focus on narratively, as well as mechanically.
Cool.
So with the sort of intentionality of calling all magic users witches, sort of regardless of tradition or gender or anything, have you found that I know you said somebody came in and was like, oh, that I'm gonna do a Kabbalah thing or something. Have you found that it's made it more accessible as far as clearly with the different traditions, but does it? Have you gotten any feedback about just having it be a witch is the thing for everything, all encompassing as far as with that?
No, actually, and I may need to cast out the net again because I did one big call. We had 7 players. We're down to 4.
As you do in Play by Post.
Yep. So, I think bringing in a second round of people or starting up a second game to bring in fresh blood and get a new perspective on that is going to help refine that a little bit. What I know we have gotten feedback on is what falls into what magical category, and how can we kind of refine that to be a little more straightforward.
Yeah, I know even in the doc that I have here, I have notes on questions, and all the questions are, where does this go?
Yep.
Which kind of, I guess, is a little bit of a problem if you're dividing things into categories. But
yeah.
I mean, that's always going to happen if you're going to do a taxonomy, right? Is you're always going to have the miscellaneous. But I looked up the number. It's currently 20 play-by-post games. Well, not all of them are as active as others, but I have a problem, like I said.
I guess I have a problem with voice games. I'm just very bad at keeping up with PvPs.
So, and then one thing that I know we need to work on is just what combination of what dice you roll when to make a thing happen.
Yeah.
Because I think we've been a little overly ambitious in maintaining skills and attributes and everything without paring it away.
It feels like some of it's not necessarily needed.
Yeah.
I know even like when we were putting together the skills, we just deleted 2 of the skills right away, like
Yep.
firearms and something else.
What so like what does the core loop of the game look like, or as far as mechanics, or like what's the it sounds like you've got dice, so what's the sort of base mechanic?
I mean, it's pretty much
It's the D10
attribute.
dice pool, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's D10 dice pool. So it's, you know, your attribute, your ranks in the type of magic, and an associated skill.
Okay.
So, like, if you're doing charms, if you're like carving a charm into a broomstick, it's like intelligence, charms, crafting.
Do you find that are you guys doing the 5-dot thing for the scale?
Yeah, we are for
Okay.
now.
Not having played a lot of White Wolf stuff,
Yeah.
it sounds like your average everyday character is going to have like what, a 2 or a 3?
Have a 1.
What, really? Okay, so a 1
So, like,
in
very broadly in White Wolf, a 1 means you can do the thing.
okay.
And a 5 means you are nearly unparalleled at doing the
Okay.
thing.
So with the skills and the sort of sphere or domain or whatever you know type of magic you're calling it, you're looking at a range of basically 0 to 15. And my gut instinct with that would say if a normal task or a medium task is something that like somebody with 2 dots across the board would be able to do, that's like 6.
Yeah.
Like,
so
the difference of somebody who's like, you know, 3 versus 6 versus somebody who's really good at it would be 12. It seems like there's already sort of a built-in, like, I don't know, the difficulty scale for White Wolf, does it already have like a thing where most of them are 3 separate pools that you're putting together like that?
It's mostly 2.
Okay, yeah, because that was the thing I was thinking.
Yeah.
Is if,
one thing. Sorry.
No,
Sorry, God.
sorry. I was just gonna say, like, if you're gonna have 3 things like that, I wonder like how much of it might be useful to reduce the scale from like 5 each to being maybe like 3 each for the skills and the domain, just so that your total isn't as swingy.
Yeah, one thing we did do to kind of facilitate that, and we probably need to do it to more things, is we capped your types, your school, your sphere, magic, whatever, at 3 dots for now. Because the way in the setting things work is that it's like a combination 8-year institution. So the idea is that you're going to come in, and for the first 4 years of it, of in-game play, you're not going to go above 3 necessarily, because
like,
you're a high schooler.
Using a Harry Potter analogy, you're not doing Newt level magic in 3rd year.
Right.
Exactly. So it's like, again, 1 means you can do the thing. 3 means you're like a prodigy level person at it. But you don't go above that until you enter like your post grad work, pretty much.
Right. To Richard's point about the high level swing there made me think that it might be interesting. You mentioned combining, say, crafting with the skill. Crafting is the skill.
with charms or something.
Yeah, with the domain. It might be interesting to build in those associations as separate domains rather than having a skill combination. So you have charm crafting as a domain, charm casting as a different domain.
Then you're going to get a lot of different disciplines in there.
I was just going to say the the hard part with that is that if you split them all out into their own individual things, then you get a lot of to have a competent character who is widespread. You end up having to put lots of small points into a big thing, big thing, and then you have a list of 80 combinations.
And that's the thing we wanted to avoid.
Yeah.
Specifically. But yeah, it definitely the probability things. It's not my strength. Hey, we were talking about how the D&D magic is appealing to math people. I come from much more of a literature background. Getting up on the math, but I still don't know a lot about like probability stuff, so that's definitely something to keep in mind.
To be fair, I know a fair amount of math stuff. 0 of my games use dice. So.
Yeah.
And that's something we kind of wanted to do as well, is make this more of a narrative, talk things out system.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go with like, are you guys really leaning into into the quasi, like, the Hogwarts experience where you're looking at, like, is that a core part of the game, or is that just sort of an influence of the setting for you all?
It is the entire action of the game, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. You guys may have broken off and done other things, but it was very slice of life.
The main point of the game is for it to be a slice of life. So to give you more frameworks on the setting, currently it's set in the Salem Academy of Magic, which is in Massachusetts. And
so just thinking about that, like because the thing that's immediately jumping to mind for me is like, if you're leaning into the core experience of the game and the core setting of the game being about a school, right, and being about the academic thing, one thing that might be like, I would think about leaning into that and saying, okay, if we have to divide magic up into X number of things anyway, right, and there's a progression of dots or whatever, maybe there's no mechanical thing. There's no dice to worry about with actually casting magic and all that, at a really granular level, but a course list, right? Like, it gets kind of back to that, like, oh, well, there's a list of, a shopping list of 100 things, but it could be at the start of your semester, right? Pick out the courses that you're going to take and what level you're going to take them at, and that's your course load. It's like, if that's already happening as part of the game, just lean into that, and you can say, okay, maybe there's a mechanic of like, how much work can you take on, right? Yeah. Like, how hard do you have to study? Are you going to pass or fail at your exams or your whatever based on like your stress level or your workload or what's going on in your life, or, oh my gosh, Jenny just broke up with me. I'm so sad. I'm going to fail my test now. Or, I'm going to work extra hard because my parents are really looking to, whatever. That's immediately where my head went.
Yeah. And that's a good idea. That's something to look into, because, like Minna said, that was something that the players themselves were delighted to do.
Oh, we had so much fun coming up with course titles and stuff. Like, what are all these? What could we be studying right now?
Right.
But like, somebody will end up taking like a magical, like, intro to magical law. Like, how do you write laws to regulate magic in a this world? Because it's not like Harry Potter. It's not a secret. It's just a part of life.
Yeah, it's like all those like Studio Ghibli movies where there's just magic out there. Like, you're not. I think Kiki's is the one that we were referencing there. Yeah.
I think that would be a great thing to build into character creation, rather than necessarily having exact titles. Like, what subjects are you studying this year? Not
like write it yourself.
Like, a list. What are the things that you are going to learn how to do? What are the things that you did last year that you already know how to do? one thing that I wanted to speak to about mechanics that I realized that is a thing that I disliked about the White Wolf systems is that they have a very strict, straightforward pass, fail, botch, super success thing, and it's like it's not great storytelling. I want all options that the dice can convey to be compelling. So the dice give, no matter what the result, the dice is going or are going to give me a good story. I just don't know what that story is going to be until I roll the dice. So, like PBTA.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just giving a PPTA example. You've got the 3 different success ranges, and generally speaking, something goes wrong, deal with it narratively. Something goes right, deal with it narratively. Something goes kind of right, deal with it narratively. Like it's always building. It's always creating something, even if you fail.
Yeah, and I think I will say I think part of the struggle with like choosing a system to build off of is that no system is going to be perfect. You're just kind of going to take a basis and run with it. It's something that does something you like. But yeah, I can definitely, there's flaws probably with using the mage system.
But it's not a problem.
Play around with it.
Use the parts that you like.
Yeah.
And run with it, lean into those.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, it's adjusting from a binary success fail like model is super easy, right? Like it's literally, you can say if you fail, maybe you fail at a cost, or you succeed at a cost, right?
Yeah.
Doing the maybe you succeed but things aren't great, you know, like defining the gray areas, and if you want to specifically give criteria for like, oh well, if you get 2 below the DC or 2 above, you know, any of that stuff, you can do that. But like, I think it's a matter of just the tone that you set in the guidance of like, if somebody fails at something, make sure it's interesting, right? And that
even just like tacking on some GM moves, like in PBTA, like the things that can happen when people fail,
right?
That move the story forward.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, because like one of the things that we're doing with Descent into Midnight, like obviously we're using PBTA, right? So it's already got the built-in, you know, miss 7 to 9 hit, and then a 10+ range band in there. And there's, you know, with PBTA, there's actually like the 5 levels of success, and then certain moves. There's like the super bad, kind of bad, okay, pretty good, and really good. And like most moves will give you like a selection of like the, you know, if you've got a default move, it's going to be toward the lower end of that, and if you've got a specialized advanced move, it's going to be towards the higher end of that, where your successes are going to be bigger and brighter because it's your specialty. But it's still within that 3 range band. But one of the things that we're actually doing is we have a move that lets you bump up your effective result by going and embracing the corruption or whatever. But there's definitely, it's a good one.
I know almost nothing about Descent into Midnight besides having Googled it, and I'm very, very curious.
Well, we got to get you into a game of it, because it is really weird. It is one of the weirdest games I've ever played. But yeah, like you start out the game as weird sea creatures that you create yourself, and then it gets weirder from there. So,
everything I've seen about it sounds really interesting.
But yeah, like we sort of doubled down on the idea of being able to adjust your success and take hold of the narrative results of what's going on by making a choice on the player's side. And I think, you know, it's really easy to find ways to do that. It's just a matter of picking the right one that lets, you know, like how you want to reinforce the theme with the mechanics of how you give the player agency to decide how they failed or like what the cost was for their success.
Right.
I like it.
Very cool. So, does anybody have any more stuff, or should I launch into some of my weird little one?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
The game I'm working on is called Full on Delivery, and it's basically a epistolary. It's, I guess you can view it as play by post, but it's literally post, like mail or paper.
Yeah.
And it's designed to be a screw tape letters kind of dialogue between a demon and the imp that is trying to corrupt a human. And so the demon and the imp are having this conversation over mail, trying to solve problems with corrupting the human.
Okay.
The issue I'm running into is, besides the sort of backstory of the scenario and setting, it feels like a mundane presentation of an otherworldly experience. And I would like it to be more otherworldly feeling. The best I can come up with is printable letters that look like demonic contracts that you fold into these envelopes that you use to mail the letters.
So
less screw tape letters, more.
Yeah.
But I wonder though, like, so if the premise of the game is you have, like, are the letters themselves physical objects that exist within the universe of the game? Like,
Yes.
is it so? There is a demon physically somewhere who is physically sending a letter on a piece of paper to the imp and back and forth, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
Possibly
with that,
with the demonic courier involved.
okay.
May or may not wear a U.S. Postal Service.
Well, I think you could. So it's how do I? I'm trying to think of put the words together in my head and it's not working. So the juxtaposition of the otherworldly and the mundane to me is one of the ways that can make the otherworldly feel even more otherworldly in a way. Like, so you can imagine, like, all the urban fantasy stuff where it's like you've got a werewolf sitting down to send an email, right? Like, that feels very relatable, but at the same time, you see it and you recognize that's freaking weird, right? Like, for this, I almost feel like maybe you could lean into stuff like, aside from sort of tying in things like getting your postal carrier's name, right, and using that, like, and sort of creating backstory around that, like all the weird stuff has to be grounded in reality since we can't just make demon letters, right? Like, but they're little touches of strangeness, I think, would be the way to really drive that home. And I don't know if like a fountain pen or using red ink or little things like that
You
you
mean
can do.
the thing with lemon juice?
Yeah. Well,
Where you write lemon juice and then you have to hold it over a candle flame.
I think if this is going to be like a printable thing, right?
Yes.
So I would say letterhead. To that point.
Oh my god, yes.
Just make some letterhead for each
Yeah.
player.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at with the contract. That's what I meant.
Even stuff like, and this presumes a lot, right? But a 3D printable wax seal of some sort or something. That presumes a lot of like access to a 3D printer.
Yeah.
You can always have like baked in stuff and then suggestions for other fun things you could do. Get creative with it to create the feel that you want.
Yeah, because I know that, funnily enough, Minna and I had looked at, what is it, Sincerely, which is...
It's like an epistolary game about, I think, two women in like the late 19th century, maybe?
Yeah, and it's the same idea.
Yeah.
I mean, broadly, right? It's not demons, it's women, but...
It's epistolary is the point.
Yeah.
And they did that.
By the way, it's not a word anybody in an accounting office knows. If you bring it up during a meeting, somebody's going to give you a funny look.
Well, it's not a word in common usage these days. The only reason I remember what it is because I've been playing a lot of Good Society lately. So,
it's one of my favorite formats.
Yeah, I always have to explain it. It's been so nice that I didn't have to.
Yeah, but I definitely think that, like you're saying with the contract, like providing letterhead, even like a fillable address label or something. I don't know.
Yeah, because is it supposed to be a very like corporate or like regimented thing, or is it supposed to be more of a like a personal thing for the demon in the end?
Both. So
okay.
The imp talking to his superior is basically a screw up, and his voice would be more casual. The demon responding to the imp, the superior demon responding to the imp, would have a more corporate voice. So just going off of what you stated, it would be funny to have a form that had checkboxes. I am displeased with your response.
So what tone are you going for with this? Is it more serious or more comedic?
Is it serious? Is it more Pratchett?
I was going to say, I'm thinking a lot about Good Omens right now.
Oh, yeah, Good
Omens. Or, like, have you ever had to do a performance improvement plan, like, where you have to write SMART goals, and, like, it could be a corporate...
That is...
Oh, God.
One thing I find hilarious with Good Omens is like they're trying to mimic the human corporate stuff, and like there's like some of the language, but they don't get it. They don't understand why it's like that. They don't understand how to do everything wrong. They like try to use. Crowley tries to get them to use like telephones, and they just start talking to him through radios, like through his car radio.
Yeah, or like similar like Eric by Pratchett, if anyone's read that one. Which is
I haven't, but Good Omens is also Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, so it's his take on Faust.
Oh, that sounds good.
It has a lot of that same idea, like what is hell? Yeah. Hell is bureaucracy, to the point that the demons long for the good old days of torture.
Yeah, the Good Omens, they definitely still are in that old medieval mindset of torture, but they're trying to adapt a little bit, and it's not working out. He does a good job, I think, with that combination of the mundane and the otherworldly, to the point where it's like it's off and it's also hilarious.
Yeah,
I definitely need to reread those. It's been a while. I've forgotten about them entirely.
but yeah, like for what's the tone you're going for with the game? Like, what kind of experience do you want the player or players to have with it?
Well, the initial experience that I'm modeling this off of, which is not entirely relevant anymore, was that my grandmother in the UK would send airmail letters, and at that time, it was all based on weight. So what she would do is she would get airmail envelopes and write her letter on the envelope, and not use paper. So when I got a letter from my grandmother, I would have to be very careful how to open it to not destroy the message within. because there was no within. So it was an attempt to recreate that feeling of getting something that you had to take care of and maintain and sort of open up to get the experience of the story. And
Kind
then
of where you were looking at foldable envelopes.
exactly, yeah. And the so the idea at the core was that you'd print out basically a form that you'd write your story on, and then you fold that into the envelope and mail that.
That's cool.
And that I haven't decided whether or not this is a single player game with a second player as the recipient. And you just keep mailing this one half of this conversation to your friend across the country, or they respond back. I haven't decided that yet. I like both versions for different reasons. Like, I keep getting these demonic notes from my friend. What the hell is going on?
Oh, so you would advise not even letting the friend know?
Well, I will obviously advise, because it seems like the right thing to do, but I realize that sometimes people aren't going to listen to advice.
I will say that right out of high school, I dated this girl, and like we broke up, and like 6 or 7 months later, she sent out some like really dark poetry that had like themes of self-harm out of the blue, and I ended up like being like, okay, this is real weird, and like ended up contacting like her school counselor and just being like, hey, you should probably know this. And she got real upset about it, was like, I was just trying to share my art. And I'm like, yeah, but
yeah,
that's
that is my worry. But I did converse sided version.
I guess the experience of creating and receiving something that is in a way sacred and has to be treated with care, I think is really interesting. My immediate thought for something like that would actually run more towards the foldable envelope. I think is really cool because it requires, if you're actually going to mail it, it requires that it be folded well, right? That it'll stay together. You might even put some tape on there to make sure it stays together, and then the person receiving it can open it. That in and of itself, of receiving that item and creating the item itself, is interesting. But I think if you wanted to really dig deeper with that, you could go and make something that is physically fragile. Like, I'm imagining getting something like a felt pen and tissue paper, right? Where you would write something on the tissue paper, so the person actually doing the writing has to be very careful and delicate with it. And then when you would fold it up in the envelope or whatever, you would send it, and the person receiving it also has to be very careful with it, because it's a very delicate thing, and having to open it and not tear it or whatever. One thing that might be interesting too is if there are like materials that can be easily destroyed, making that a part of the game, like if you have to burn the letter, or if you have to destroy it somehow to destroy the evidence, or something like that. Maybe that's at the end of the game, or I don't know if that's something you want to bring in.
Or the Beast did that.
Okay.
It was this one-player story game and journaling game. They advise at the end, destroy the journal. Okay, you're done.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because creating if you've got printer paper, creating your own envelope is basically trivial. There's instructions on how to do it. You can fold it. I'm an origami guy. Like that's not hard. But I think if you're driving at that core experience of like being very careful and having a treasured object, like what makes it precious, and sort of like that's the question that I would ask, because the demon instruction thing is really cool and is an interesting thing, but I think the physicality of the letter itself isn't what's going to sell the game. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that that's what's going to make the experience, unless you've got something that sort of ties in with like the demonic nature of it, right? Unless you're really going for the mundane and doing it as like a satire.
Yeah, it's hazy.
I wonder if you might look at something like Wreck This Journal for ideas of what you could do to the letter.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was that first little bit?
There's this book called Wreck This Journal that is like, you put this book through hell in various ways. I wonder if that might have any ideas for like ways that you could destroy but not fully destroy a letter.
Yeah, that's something to look at.
That might be interesting to see, like, to write a letter knowing the full contents of it and then partially destroy it and then send it.
Like maybe, for example, I'd maybe not advise this because fire, but you have to burn it to send it, so you have to like burn like a corner of it and then like hope it doesn't destroy the rest. But that's probably a bad idea because fire is dangerous.
There's along the same lines, there's like the artificial aging with like tea bags and stuff that definitely adds to the fragility of the paper.
Yeah, and I've done, as props for campaign games, stick some paper in the oven and yellow it and burn it and partially char it and you light it on fire and get the fire extinguisher. But
let's not advise that in a rule book.
It's just, maybe. Probably not worth advising, but it's a thing.
You could always just have a list again, like a list of like different ways that you could make it strange, difficult to access.
Here's an interesting point. What if the part of the advice to the imp basically gets redacted?
Oh.
So whether you mark it out with black marker, cut it out, or burn it out,
I like that.
Part of it is redacted.
And then the imp has to try and like construct what actually needs to happen.
I think, like having 2 players for a game like this sounds like it would be more interesting because of the asynchronous, it's I'm going to go and do a thing, and there's differing levels of knowledge about what's going on, and so the person who is receiving the letters as the imp doesn't know what they're supposed to do in the same way. Like they don't have the full story, so their response is only based on what they're getting or what comes through, in the same way that the character doesn't know what they're supposed to do, and so when they write their response and the response comes back, maybe they don't know the results of the last letter they sent, or the thing that happened. They're just getting the response to it.
Maybe even like the imp, whoever's playing the imp, like sends off their letter and then does a little exercise for this is what I'm doing based on this letter, because they've had to go and do it without having received feedback.
Maybe another.
Then, you might get another letter back like, no, that wasn't the right thing to do. Too late, did it.
Another fun idea might be to incorporate, and this might be a little too complex, some kind of incomplete ciphering system. Or something to that effect, where the demon sends a letter to the imp has to interpret the letter but doesn't have the fully correct tools to do so.
Mm.
I don't know. That might be like too complex.
Yeah, I think the redaction method is probably a little more clear and accomplishes the same thing. Even just like rolling a die and you remove that word, and then you roll the die again and remove that word, and keep doing that until X number of words are removed. And
you keep a note of those words and what effect ignoring those could have.
yeah, and that's the letter you send off, and have fun.
Yeah.
So then it becomes more of a game about like difficult communication and like basically bad communication.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The somebody just posted in the GM party chat suggesting that there could be just unfamiliar terms or words that are misused.
Yeah.
So, like required terms, you have to, as the supervisor, you have to advise that, they put in papers, please. There is an elaborate corporate documentation or like official documentation. You have to do this to everybody entering the board. You have to do this and this and this. Check this document. And this date is the match. And this date, that's the match. And you can have this elaborate guide for the supervisor that you have to have. Letter one must have all of this information to communicate all this, and just so much bureaucracy.
Yeah.
People are going to read.
I mean, yeah.
And then even if they do follow it, half of it gets burned out.
Yeah, I mean,
it could even be some. Sorry, interrupting.
No, go ahead.
It could even be something as simple as like your letter must include this word somewhere. You have to find a way to include it. Things like that.
Yeah, game jam style.
So I guess my question is, if you were going to sit down with a friend and say, hey, I'm going to write you a letter as a demon who is trying to instruct an incompetent or wayward subordinate, and you write a letter, no redacted information, nothing like that. You send it to the person, they read it and go, okay, how can I, respond to this in a way that's like fun and interesting and conveys that I'm hiding things or, like is clearly doing all that. And like that back and forth loop. What do you want that is different from that in the experience? Like, aside from like, because you could do that, right? You could literally just say, here's a writing prompt for two people, they write back and forth, and this is the subject, and watch as it spirals into wherever it goes. Because I think that's the thing that I'm struggling with is like what experience are you trying to give the players, and like because that'll inform like how you reinforce it, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, let me talk about some of the earlier designs. I haven't really left them. I just haven't moved forward. Where the it was similar to that, where you have a writing prompt for the demon, and it guides them to say what screwed up and how are you going to advise them to fix it. And then the imp gets that advice, acts on it out of scene, and then sends a response how that advice did not work. And they made the situation worse. well, somebody made the situation worse.
Right.
And then it's like this spiraling out of control
Mhm.
thing. Part of the interesting thing is the imp is also going to be falling in love with the target
Oh,
and hiding it from
Okay.
the player. I forgot this one.
Okay.
So there's that is a big no-no in demon society. So it's something that has to be hidden.
Do you have any kind of like mechanic for fleshing out the human and like what they both know about them?
No,
Because that's kind of gonna be what the action of the game is about. What's happening in the human's
Mhm.
life.
yes, that is a good point.
And what access to information each of them has, right? Like,
Right.
because
Maybe just like a dossier and then like some things that only the imp knows.
Right. Yes, and some things that some information that is incorrect
Hmm.
from the superior's point of view, or from the imp's point of view. If the imp knows about the true nature of the information because they're there in the field,
Hmm.
but the dossier says something. It's like not the case.
so thinking about this from like a play-by-post perspective, like also what's the difference? What does it being a physical letter add that couldn't be accomplished in an email or a digital format? Because I like the physicality of there being an actual object that you can interact with, but if that is the case, like it almost feels like that needs to be an integral part of the experience. And how do you can double down on that? That's just going with that part of it. As far as the human and everything, it feels like there's got to be a way to guide the descent into sort of shenanigans, right? Where the supervisor has to have some other mechanism of getting information, it feels like, other than just what the imp is reporting. Because why would the imp do anything other than just say that, hey, everything is going great?
yeah.
Right? Like, because if they're hiding things, there has to be a way for those things to be discovered. Otherwise, there's no tension.
Maybe at certain intervals that like at certain intervals there's some other like outside entity that goes to like inspect or watch a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
And it could be built into the rules that after letter number X, the demon knows why.
Right. Yeah, so you have to build up that false beginning.
Because I know something Sincerely does is that there's things that are happening on either side of the letters that it's laid out for you and you want to work into your story.
Yeah, 'cause it's like each letter must contain like 1, 2, 3, but it's
Yeah.
up to you how to incorporate that in.
Right. Yeah, having a timeline that is independent of the letters.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because I think that'll give it structure, and give their, like, it will create the tension that might otherwise be missing. Because again, if the imp can hide everything, there's no game, right?
Yeah.
Very cool. Lots of ideas. All right. I think we're pretty much wrapped up here. Any things to say?
One thought. I don't know how applicable it is for this, but I know Reflections does a really good job of of structuring the thing for, like, a story of two people who were once friends and go through and they do the whole thing and then they end up fighting each other, whatever. but it has prompts for specific things that each character wants in a scene, where they pick it out themselves, and
They're trying
the
to make
more-
it happen.
yeah, they're trying to make a certain thing happen. So it might be really interesting to have a goal in mind. So the supervisor writes a letter and they pick a goal from a list of 1 to 4 things, and they are trying to get the imp to say or do something in the return letter. And part of the prompt for that letter from the imp, if you number it back and forth, however many it is, will be, hey, these are 4 things that you have to respond to about what you did with these things, or 4 things that you dealt with. And each of those things can correspond to one of the desires that the supervisor has. And so the supervisor will pick, I want in this realm, I want the human to have done X thing, or I want the imp to have done X thing with regard to this subject. And then in the imp's response letter, they're told that, hey, you need to address this thing. And then there's several of them, so that they don't quite know which, they can try and hide one thing and not mention another, or take some action in one way with one thing. And then have that go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And then by the end of it, they've accrued some sort of, maybe it's not even, mechanical or influence tokens or a roll or anything at the end, but by the end, you've hit certain check marks, and that can tell you or give some indication of how well each side did. And then that could, especially if you have a storyline of the imp falling in love with this human, how well are they able to hide it? Are they able to run away? Are they able to get away with it? For the supervisor, do they find out about it? How screwed are they in their own thing? Are they going to be able to hide it themselves?
Almost
so that
Fiasco Aftermath.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of Soth. Soth has a point-based mechanism where the GM gets points for actions that the players do. If they kill an innocent, they get 10 points or whatever.
Right.
And they can spend the points on additional actions. It's interesting. But having those checkpoints, these are the things that you're supposed to be doing, and these are the things that you did do. I like that. That's nice. Hennessy also posted in the chat that HR should get involved. So there's the independent third-party observer that provides a checkpoint.
Yeah, and I think
go and check on the situation, and now it's time for your quarterly review.
and I think the framing of Jeff Stormer just wrote a game or just put out a game called Mission Accomplished, where it's James Bondy super spies or whatever go out on a mission, everything goes wrong, and the game is the briefing afterwards.
We
and
talked about it on 2 episodes ago.
Okay, yeah. And that whole thing of the game book or the instructions being written in the voice of a document or whatever from the spy agency or whatever. It could be really interesting to have the game be framed as hey, these are the policy guidelines or whatever of this, and these are the things you need to check on. And you can switch out of the voice and have the the nitty-gritty sort of outside of that voice, but have the majority of it be, hey, here's the HR thing, and we've got your quarterly review coming in X amount of time, and that's the timer that drives the tension of everything.
Yeah, that's yeah, and I feel like having an HR document that is provided to the imp when they started employment would make a great rule book, because the imp has certainly scribbled all sorts of notational bullshit in the margin.
Well, and I think what would actually be really interesting is to have a dual layer thing where the supervisor demon has a certain version of the rule book that's pristine and has guidance specifically for, hey, you are a supervisor, this is what you need to do for the people under you. Right. And then the imp has the like modified version that is for like the non-exempt employees or whatever it is, right? Like they have that version, and you can have their notes on there and everything, but that gives you the asymmetric experience,
almost like Betrayal at House on the Hill, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that'll let you really fine tune. Yeah.
It's a great game.
Yeah, and I think that would let you fine tune sort of what you want each of those experiences to be and the scale of the threat. And because you have an outside force acting on both of the characters, they each have a stake in the success of themselves and the other character. Because if the imp does okay within their own sphere, but their supervisor gets screwed, that's going to roll downhill to them. Right, so they've got a lot of stuff going on, and the supervisor has a vested interest in making sure that the imp does X things, so that they have enough capital to hide what their role in it or whatever. And so each of them has their own goals and their own currency that they're using to enact whatever it is, and their own sort of like success criteria. So they both have things that they're going towards and have like a measure of how they're doing, and then their own results, and then at the end, like however they did, those can affect each other, and then you can have like the final thing. You might even have like as part of the instruction books, like a form for a termination or an improvement plan, formal improvement plan, or things like that, where you can draw on that kind of corporate HR stuff as a measure of how well each of the characters did, and maybe even have a form for like the reviews for both characters, and have the other character act as HR and have an instruction set that's like after the game is played, after you have done the results for the individual characters, now each of you has to be the HR person reviewing the other person, or something like that, right? Like where you can take on that role and be the third party to the other person.
Cool. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, that's awesome. Fun fact: my mother-in-law is senior HR in government. So
all right, there you go.
Get some forms out of that.
There you are.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, that is so helpful, and I think that unstuck me quite significantly.
Awesome. Well, that's what we're here for, right?
Yeah. So I think we'll just wrap it up, and we'll just run through all of us, and let's say where people can find you on the internet and whatever you want to talk about project-wise. Go for it. Alex.
All right. You can find me on Twitter at Olympian Zeus, and I'm this has really reignited me to take a look and kind of rework witches a bit.
Beautiful. Minna.
You can find me at Minaminar on Twitter, and I would suggest looking in the description of the video for that, because there's no good way to pronounce that. I'm also on the Magpies podcast, and I think in the upcoming Ironhides podcast. And yeah, we really need to look at witches some more.
Yeah.
All right. I am Richard Kreutzlandry, and my Twitter handle is rkreutzlandry. It's a little tough to spell, but again, you can find it here. You can also find Descent into Midnight at DIM for Descent into Midnight RPG. On Twitter, you can go to www.descentintomidnight.com to check out a little bit more about the game, and then we actually have an actual play recording from one of our very early play tests with like Darcy Ross. Taylor Lebrecht was running it, and then our friend Ryan joined us, and then if you want to check out my origami stuff and a little bit of my gaming stuff, I've got www.origamigaming.com. You can see some of my original models there, and I've got diagrams for most of them. And then a couple of little silly games that I've just sort of thrown up, because that's what you do as someone who designs games for fun, based on stupid things on Twitter. So
yeah. Most of my games end up being jokes that
Got out of hand.
end up being, well, what if this wasn't just a joke?
yes,
Cough, cough, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Make a RPG, competitive improv RPG, sort of in the style of the Adventures of Baron Munchausen, that involved taking control via puns.
Which is great.
It's amazing.
like
But
you do.
you can find that and all of my other tabletop games and experiments on verdandy.com. And I'm on Twitter at Andy Verdan, and GM Party is at the obvious URL at gmparty.com. And you can check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/GMParty. And I think that's about it. Yeah, this has been great.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful. Thanks for the show.
Thank you much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.